We'll move on to the Champions League final now. Niall, there was a story you picked out when you came in this afternoon to me in the Sunday Independent, Dermot Crowe.
Yeah, I think that this is pages 6 and 7 of the Sunday Independent today. And it's actually, myself and Paul were just talking outside before we came on air. It's actually a brilliant GAA spread in its totality. So the piece, the central piece is, I'd say it must be 2,000 odd words, with Father Harry Bowen, the legendary Clare manager. And like we'll get into the depth and detail of that, but it's surrounded by a column from Colm O'Rourke on kind of the need for reform and his thoughts on kind of John Horan obviously was out earlier in the week saying that, you know, now there is an appetite for a championship reform. Tommy Conlon kind of looking at kind of again the implications of reform, and Marie Crowe, who on the back of John Horan's comments went out and spoke to a lot of players that will be involved in this B Championship if the idea for a B Championship ever kind of gains its momentum and fully gets off the ground. And I think when you read them in their totality, it's a perfect reflection of where GAA, the game of GAA, the game of Gaelic football, the game of hurling is at the moment. The Father Harry Bowen piece, I just thought, as someone who doesn't actually know a huge amount or didn't know a huge amount about Harry Bowen before reading this today, I just thought it was a phenomenal piece, thoroughly enjoyable. And a kind of, as enjoyable nearly for the off-the-field insights that Dermot manages to get out of his conversation with Harry Bowen. So Harry Bowen, you know, studied in Maynooth and was ordained in 1963, but then was sent off to do a postgrad in sociology in Cardiff outside, before coming back to Ireland. And it has greatly influenced his thinking and future work, especially in rural regeneration when he returned to Ireland in 1968. So this is before he became Clare hurling manager in the mid-70s. And like Father Harry Bowen, he's from Feakle, he's from the same village as Gerlochnan, and it kind of positions him perfectly to talk about Ireland from nearly the 1960s through to the modern day, the changes in Irish society. Dermot says he talks about the 4 revolutions of the 60s in information, industry, education and the church, and how he could see increasing centralisation and emigration gradually killing rural Irish life. The lessons that he learned from his time in England, and how when he came back he saw Irish society in the 70s nearly making the exact same mistakes, the decimation of rural life to a large extent because all of the economic interests of the country were kind of concentrated around the central cities, and the impact, the knock-on effect that had. I mean, there were so many lines that you could pick out of it. Like his own work, he essentially got involved in a project in Feakle where they went on and they promoted a scheme to build rural houses in Feakle. Like when he said in the 1970s, out of a population of 150 people, there was only maybe 3 people between the ages of 20 and 40. And Harry Bowen said, like, this village is going to die. Got into a scheme where they got 20 houses built in Feakle. And that momentum that gave that, you know, essentially saved Feakle as a town, and the knock-on effect was saved Feakle GAA and the GAA club that was the lifeblood of that town. I don't know, but I thought it was a fascinating piece, Paul.
I agree with every word you've said there, and I would tip the hat to Dermot Crowe on this, because you can't do an interview like this unless you've prepared for it properly. He's asked all the right questions when he was down there about the nature of the place of the GAA in a rural community, and he's woven Harry Bowen's story into it and how he has changed so much. And that point about him going to being sent to Cardiff to look at sociology, and when he's over there in Cardiff, he looked at the large sink estates and looked at the high-rise flats and came back determined that in Ireland that we wouldn't do that in our big cities. Yeah. And he says now, look, we did exactly what they did, and we built an economy around big estates and apartment living, and basically that we made, as he says himself, the very same mistakes that they made in England. But what's really interesting is that he's not a man who just gave out about something. He went and did it, and the fact that he was involved in a rural housing association, and it's absolutely crying out for people like him to take the initiative, given the manner in which the local government and state is incapable of delivering the number of houses that are necessary at the moment across communities across Ireland. But the point you made at the beginning, Niall, is exactly right. The 4 pieces on this page, they feed off each other, and they offer a brilliant insight to where the GAA is at the moment. Now, there is an issue around the championship, and there is an issue around the calendar of play. How do you make a competitive All-Ireland Football Championship? How do you make a proper calendar of play where club and county can live together? And these issues are dealt with really well in the other pieces. And Colm O'Rourke makes that essential point. You can't fix the championship without fixing the calendar of play. And Marie Crow's point, in a very well put together piece about what people wish from who actually are from so-called weaker counties or whose teams are down there, what they wish to play for. And do they not merit consideration in the construction of what is about to be done?
Yeah, it is interesting because, like, as you read one, you're forming an opinion in your head, and you might move down then to Marie Crow's piece, and all of a sudden you're going, geez, he's right as well on the other side. Like, it's so hard to kind of actually find the balance.
What I'm unclear about is for people who propose a B championship or a C championship. Now, we can put whatever name we want to put on it, but it's a B championship or a C championship.
Paul Rouse Cup.
Yeah, that'll be the Z championship. But, if we create a C championship, presumably what we're talking about then is the recreation of the same league that was being played for earlier in the year, now as a C championship.
Yeah.
What is the point of that? So if you're going to change, and if you're going to create a tiered championship system, then you have to also change the league, and you have to shorten the calendar season. So the county I know most about is Offaly, and the Offaly footballers began to play last December, right, in O'Byrne Cup matches.
Yeah.
And they, at the beginning of December, they were training from at least the start of November and I think October. They will likely go until into July. Late June, early July, Offaly will still be playing football. That is an enormous season to be running. And meanwhile, there is no championship football being played in Offaly amongst the clubs. That is utterly unsustainable to keep something going around like that. And the story of Offaly is not replicated in exact measure around the country, but it is retold time and again in other counties. And if you don't fix the two of them, you can't fix them in isolation to each other is the basic point. And I'm with Marie Crow. I believe Marie Crow's arguments. I think she's really hit something in her column.
There's a couple of paragraphs. I'll just read them out here because I think they really encapsulate everything that you're talking about there and the frustration. So after John Horan came out earlier in the week after the first round qualifier draw, and he kind of said that there's an appetite for this change now. Marie Crow, so she contacted players from the so-called weaker counties to see how they felt about it. I was met with frustration, suspicion, exasperation, and definitely a lack of appetite. The players I contacted want change, all right, but they also want help. They want more resources and better structures within their county so they can improve. They certainly don't want to be demoted to a secondary competition. And then she quotes Laois manager John Sugrue, who I can imagine tongue very firmly in cheek as he made these comments.
As any Kerry man will.
Yeah, very firmly in cheek. Said, sure, feck it, we'd probably be better off with a two-tier championship. We'd be better off if these kind of games didn't happen, inconveniencing lots of people who want to see the top 8 play against each other. I think we should just whittle it down and let the best teams play each other all the time and let everyone else play in backfields around the country.
And that's...
But this is the danger of what it comes to, and I know nobody's soliciting my view on football reform, and that's grand. I'm okay with that. But I think the things that need to happen is, I think that there needs to be within the championship, if there is going to be any form of secondary competition, I actually think there needs to be a path of progression out of it within that year and within that championship. So if you win the B Championship, or if you're one of the top 2 teams in the B Championship in the year, you're not waiting until next year to reap the rewards. Yeah. You're actually getting your shot at Sam Maguire at an All-Ireland quarter-final or a preliminary quarter-final in that year, because for all of the good and bad of the Joe McDonagh Cup, I actually think that having to wait a year really is...
Well, you get back in, you get back in to play quarter-final, pre-quarter-final matches, and that has something to it, but a football championship that is just tiered and is a replication of the National Football League is not an answer. Yeah,
and it's a lovely idea to think that, all these teams are going to be playing similarly equipped teams week on week. It's going to be fantastic, but...
So who are you going to put it?
That's exactly what I'm saying. Yeah. You're kind of just assuming that all the other teams are going to be happy to be playing teams of their level and not get a crack against the bigger sides.
So if you think about it, this is exactly right. So Dublin play a middle of Division 2 team, what's going to happen there? It's most likely going to be a wipeout.
Yeah.
So there are very few teams in any sport who the very best teams won't obliterate on any given day. And that's the reality of sport. Look at Man City did it in the FA Cup final to Watford, middle of the Premier League team. Like, this is what happens occasionally in sport.
Yeah, do you just have to kind of accept that, you know what, some teams are actually considerably better than others?
Well, as I say, the players who I would know best and I have most experience with are Offaly. I would bet any money that the players in the Offaly dressing room do not want to go and play again in a B or a C competition. And look at it this way: Offaly nearly beat Meath in the quarter-final of the Leinster Football Championship. Should have beaten Meath in the quarter-final of the Leinster Football Championship. Meath are a Division 1 team now, and Offaly are a middle of Division 3 team. So people want to be very, very careful about how they construct divides here between counties and what they expect. There's a brilliant line in Colm O'Rourke's piece, though, and he just nips at it and he does it again. What is going to happen to Dublin in any new shake-up? And of course, anybody who wants to posit splitting up Dublin into any sections.
He's not letting that one go.
He's not letting it go, but if you want to talk about it, you also have to talk about the amalgamation of other counties.
Yeah.
So is that what you're proposing as well? Because you can't just split Dublin and then leave, say, weaker, smaller counties, so-called, in splendid isolation.
Yeah.